all happened in a fraction of a second, live to millions of people, freezing the nation in front of the TV. Little Leo's calloused fingers didn't tremble as he leaped onto the immaculate stage and brutally grabbed the beard of the most powerful man in the city. The elite audience, covered in jewels, let out a collective scream of horror, watching that dirty street kid desecrate the image of the untouchable Arthur Sterling, unaware that this act of desperate violence was the only thing separating a $50 million fortune from a historic heist. The sound of tearing adhesive was amplified by the studio microphones, a dry, repugnant noise that made everyone's stomach churn. The thick, dark beard didn't just move. It stretched the imposter's skin like a grotesque latex mask before coming loose, revealing the pale, irritated skin underneath, covered in remnants of chemical glue. The man, who seconds before had posed as a saintly philanthropist, let out a squeal of pain that didn't belong to a CEO, but rather to a cornered criminal watching his perfect disguise crumble to pieces in front of the cameras, while the gigantic security guards brutally threw the boy to the ground, crushing his ribs against the carpet. Leo didn't stop shouting the truth no one wanted to hear. "It's a hoax! He's not Arthur! Look at the glue!" he yelled, being dragged out like trash, while the imposter tried to hide his naked face with trembling hands. No one in that studio knew, but that boy held the key to a deadly kidnapping, and time to save the real billionaire was running out fast. To truly understand the madness that just unfolded on that luxurious stage, we need to rewind the tape and look far beyond the bright lights of fame. The world saw only a wild boy attacking a benefactor, but what the cameras didn't capture was the deadly secret hidden in the days leading up to that fateful interview. The real story didn't begin with applause and giant checks, but rather in the cold, cruel silence of New York's back alleys, where loyalty is tested not with money, but with sheer, hard-won daily survival. We live in a society that has been trained to blindly trust expensive suits and instinctively distrust dirty faces, an error in judgment that almost cost a valuable life. While the crowd applauded the perfect image of success, no one realized that the man sitting in the seat of power was just an empty shell, a dangerous predator disguised as a lamb. Only Leo, invisible to the elite and ignored by the powerful, possessed the key to unlocking the mystery, proving that the clearest vision often comes from those whom society refuses to see. What you are about to witness is a desperate race against time, where every second counted and justice depended solely on the courage of a small, frightened child. It was an unequal battle between the calculated greed of a criminal organization and the pure heart of a boy who only wanted to save his only friend in the world. Prepare to see how a simple act of kindness generated a debt of gratitude that not even $50 million could repay, culminating in that beard tug that revealed the stark truth. The glare from the dozens of spotlights in the Manhattan studio was almost blinding, reflecting mercilessly on the polished marble floor of the Prophet View set. Host Marcus Thorne adjusted the knot of his Italian silk tie and smiled at the camera with the surgical precision of someone commanding a national audience, while the audience, dressed in their finest evening gowns and glittering jewels, held their breath in anticipation. The low hum of the air conditioning was the only sound that competed with the $50 million electrical tension that hung heavy in the air. "Ladies and gentlemen, today we will witness history being written live," announced Marcus, his baritone voice echoing with a perfectly rehearsed theatrical gravity. "The man next to me is not just a titan of the real estate industry, but a true modern-day saint who has decided to donate his fortune. Please, a round of applause for Mr. Arthur Sterling." He gestured to the leather armchair beside him, while the applause erupted like thunder, drowning out any other sound in the room. No one in the elite audience noticed the small shadow moving frantically behind the heavy velvet curtains. It was a dirty, desperate, and almost invisible contrast against the aseptic, gilded perfection of that millionaire stage, something that shouldn't exist in that world of wealth. In the dark, cold backstage area, Leo, a boy of only 10 with a face smeared with soot and clothes that were too big for his emaciated body, crawled beneath a tangle of thick transmission cables. The smell of burnt ozone and old dust filled his nose, mixed with the nauseating aroma of expensive perfumes wafting from the audience, creating a sickening contrast that made his empty stomach rumble. A burly security guard, his black suit clinging to his muscles and his headphones flashing, passed inches from his trembling fingers, making the floor vibrate. "The east side is clear. Over," growled the security guard into the radio on his shoulder, his deep voice reverberating bouncing off the bare concrete walls of the backstage area. Leo bit his lip hard to stifle a groan of fear, his wide, exhausted eyes fixed on the single sliver of blinding light leading to the main stage, his final and perilous destination. The security guard stopped abruptly, turning his head slowly toward the equipment boxes where Leo was hiding, as if he had heard the boy's ragged breathing. Leo knew, with the instinct of someone who lives on the streets, that he had only a fraction of a second before being discovered and thrown back into the merciless cold of the New York streets. Under the intense heat of the spotlights, the man introduced as Arthur Sterling adjusted his gold-rimmed glasses on his nose, maintaining a frozen plastic smile on his face. His beard was thick, dark, and perfectly trimmed, covering much of his jaw, and he held a silver Mont Blanc pen as if it were a royal scepter, twirling it between his fingers. On the giant LED screen behind him, the gleaming digits, 50,000 years, blinked in a hypnotic neon green, awaiting only a digital signature on the tablet to be transferred. "It's an honor to be here, Marcus," said the fake CEO, his voice sounding slightly hoarse and metallic, unlike the usual warm and gentle tone of the real Arthur. "This charity, it's always been my life's dream to help those in need," he added, though his eyes remained cold and calculating, not smiling along with his mouth as he stared at the camera. He brought the fine tip of the pen close to the surface of the glass tablet, his finger hovering millimeters from the confirmation button that would seal the fate of his fortune. It was at that exact moment that a loud clang of metal hitting the floor, coming from the side aisles, instantly shattered the respectful silence of the studio. Leo burst out of the shadows behind the curtains, tripping over the untied laces of his worn-out sneakers, and fell to his knees in the center of the immaculate stage, looking like a stain of misery in a world of opulence. The elite audience gasped in horrified unison, diamond-clad women recoiling in their velvet seats as if the boy's poverty were a contagious disease. The boy struggled to his feet, breathless, pointing a dirty, accusing finger directly at the man seated in the prime spot. "Don't let him sign! It's a lie!" Leo shouted, his voice faltering from disuse and sheer terror, echoing strangely in the acoustically treated studio. "He's not Arthur! He's a fraud! The money will disappear!" he yelled at the top of his lungs, as the fake CEO abruptly stood up, knocking over the crystal water glass which shattered on the floor. Presenter Marcus stood paralyzed, his mouth agape in shock, unable to process the live interruption. But the security guards, recovering from their initial surprise, began rushing towards the stage from all directions like furious bulls, their heavy steps announcing that Leo's time was up. Huge, gloved hands gripped Leo's thin arms, violently lifting him off the ground as if he were an old rag doll. The boy kicked the air desperately, tears of frustration creating clean trails down his grimy face, while the imposter approached with a look of contempt and relief, ready to see the boy expelled. In a final act of instinctive, suicidal defiance, Leo seized the forced proximity and threw his free hand toward the man's face. "Get your hands off me, you sewer rat," hissed the imposter, too low for the audience microphones to pick up, but loud enough for Leo to hear the malice in his voice. "This ends now!" shouted the boy, his dirty fingers closing with brute force on the man's thick beard and pulling him down with the full weight of his body suspended by the security guards. The disgusting sound of strong adhesive tearing echoed, amplified by the lapel microphones, and the audience let out a horrified scream. Everyone watched as the man's chin skin stretched unnaturally and turned red, the beard beginning to peel off slowly and painfully like a grotesque mask, revealing the pale skin underneath. A week before the chaos in the studio, Leo's reality was the biting November wind howling through the narrow alley behind the gleaming Sterling Foundation Tower in Manhattan. The contrast was stark. On one side, the glass and steel facade reflecting the blue sky and untouchable wealth. On the other, Leo's world, made of dumpsters overflowing with discarded designer shopping bags and the acrid smell of rotting gourmet food. He shivered under layers of newspaper and a worn wool coat he'd found months ago, his thin, dirty fingers rummaging through the remains of an expensive pastrami sandwich someone had thrown away halfway through. The roar of limousine and sports car engines on the nearby avenue was the constant soundtrack to his exclusion, a perpetual reminder of the world to which he didn't belong. Leo had learned to be invisible, to blend into the shadows of the grimy bricks, to avoid the contemptuous stares of the security guards or the cruelty of other, older, homeless people. On that particular night, Hunger was a sharp pain in his ribs, a constant companion that made it difficult even to close his eyes and try to sleep on the damp cardboard. He was about to give up on finding something edible and try to huddle together to conserve heat when he heard the soft, metallic click of the Foundation's back service door opening. It wasn't the usual bang of employees throwing out trash. It was something careful, almost stealthy. Leo froze behind a pile of wooden crates, his eyes wide, peering into the darkness, his heart racing with the instinctive fear of being discovered in his fragile territory. A rectangle of warm, golden light cut through the darkness of the alley, and a tall figure emerged, his silhouette silhouetted against the glow of the building's luxurious interior. It was Arthur Sterling himself, impeccably dressed in a charcoal gray wool suit, but without the thick beard the world would see on TV days later. His face was clean-shaven and displayed an expression of weary gentleness. He carried no bodyguards or cameras, only 2 brown paper bags that exuded the heavenly aroma of hot soup and fresh bread, a smell that made Leo's mouth water instantly. Arthur looked around, his gentle eyes scanning the shadows without the usual judgment Leo expected of the rich, until they landed on the small figure huddled behind the crates. "It's all right, kid," Arthur said, his voice soft and genuine, lacking the metallic, rehearsed tone the imposter would later use. "I've seen you here the last few nights. No one should go hungry in my yard." He crouched slowly, extending one of the bags as a peace offering. Leo hesitated, his survival instinct screaming at him to run, but the hunger and sincerity in the eyes of that strangely powerful man made him take a step forward. He picked up the bag with trembling hands, the warmth of the food radiating through the paper, and looked up, finding a sad and understanding smile on the billionaire's face, a moment of human connection that broke down the barriers of their opposing realities. On subsequent nights, Arthur always appeared at the same time, and they shared brief moments of conversation while Leo ate voraciously. On one of these nights, Arthur noticed Leo's gaze fixed on the subtle gleam of the gold chain hanging from his waistcoat, an object of unimaginable beauty and value to the boy. With a nostalgic sigh, Arthur pulled out the object, an old pocket watch, its gold case worn by time and a rhythmic ticking that sounded like a constant, mechanical heartbeat in the silence of the alley. "It's not about the money, Leo," Arthur explained, noticing the immediate calculation in the boy's eyes about how much it would be worth at a pawn shop. "It belonged to my grandfather. He said this watch always reminded him that time is the only thing we can't buy or get back. The truth is engraved on the back." He opened the back cover with a soft click, revealing a hand-engraved inscription, and then, in an impulsive gesture, placed the heavy watch in Leo's dirty palm. "Keep it, as a lucky charm or a reminder that you're worth more than this place," Arthur said, closing Leo's small fingers over the cold metal. Leo felt the weight of the object, a treasure that seemed to burn in his hand, and looked at Arthur with a mixture of disbelief and overwhelming gratitude, unaware that this gift would become the key to everything that was to come. 2 nights before the interview, the fragile world Leo had begun to build crumbled. He was sleeping with his pocket watch pressed against his chest, under his layers of newspaper, when the sound of tires screeching on wet asphalt startled him awake. A black van with no license plates, its headlights off, entered the alley like a metal predator, stopping abruptly near the service door where Arthur usually appeared. Leo peeked through a gap in the cardboard just as the door opened, and Arthur emerged, smiling, bringing the usual dinner. Before he could take 2 steps, 2 enormous men, dressed in tactical black and with ski masks covering their faces, jumped out of the van with shocking violence. Arthur tried to scream, but a gloved hand covered his mouth, muffling the sound, while the other man applied something to his neck that instantly made him go limp. They dragged the billionaire's lifeless body into the van with the brutal efficiency of professionals, throwing the bags of food onto the ground, where the soup spilled like blood onto the dirty sidewalk. Leo was paralyzed with terror, his heart pounding against his ribs like a caged bird, unable to move a muscle as the van sped away and disappeared into the New York night, taking with it the only person who had ever treated him with kindness. Driven by a desperation that overcame his fear, Leo ran into the street and managed to cling precariously to the rear bumper of a delivery truck, heading in the same direction as the van. The ride was a terrifying blur of cold wind and exhaust fumes, crossing the bridge toward the desolate industrial areas of Queens, where the dark brick buildings looked like rotten teeth against the night sky. The truck stopped near an abandoned warehouse complex. and Leo saw the black van parked in front of one of them, a faint light leaking from a tall, dirty window. Leo climbed a pile of broken wooden pallets, ignoring the splinters that tore at his hands, until he reached the windowsill and peered inside. The interior was a vast, empty concrete space, except for a metal table lit by a construction lamp, where a man sat with his back to him. When the man turned around, Leo nearly fell off the windowsill. It was Arthur, but it wasn't Arthur. The face was identical, but the eyes were cruel and empty. The man, the criminal look-alike, stood before a mirror, holding a bottle of theatrical glue and a thick, dark fake beard. Beside him, a tablet played videos of the real Arthur's speeches on a loop, while the imposter mimicked his gestures and voice with chilling precision. Leo watched the man press the fake beard against his clean face, sealing the disguise, and in that moment, horrified, he understood the terrible plan that was about to unfold. Pressing his ear against the cold, vibrating glass of the warehouse window, Leo held his breath to catch the voices echoing from the cavernous interior. The imposter, whom the henchman called Viper, laughed as he adjusted his tie in the mirror, a dry, cruel laugh that bore no resemblance to the real Arthur's. "Tomorrow's payday, boys," he said, his voice striking the billionaire's exact tone with frightening ease. "While the real Sterling rots in here, I'll be signing the transfer live for the whole world to see." "And the 50 million? Asked one of the henchmen, wiping an automatic weapon with an oily rag. Viper grinned, checking his reflection one last time. "It goes straight into our ghost account in the Cayman Islands before the show's credits finish rolling. The charity will get air and will disappear," he explained, outlining the perfect con. Leo felt a chill run down his spine, not just from the cold night air, but from the calculated malice of the plan. "And what will we do with the original?" The henchman nodded toward a dark corner where a bound figure moved weakly. "As soon as the money hits the account, wipe him out. No body, no crime," Viper ordered coldly. Leo covered his mouth with his hands to stifle a scream of horror, realizing that the life of his only friend depended on preventing that signature, no matter the cost. Back in the blinding chaos of the TV studio, time seemed to slow down the moment Leo's fingers closed on the imposter's beard. With a tug fueled by pure adrenaline, he felt the sticky resistance of the professional glue give way beneath his fingernails. The fake beard stretched like a grotesque elastic membrane, peeling away from Viper's jawline and revealing a patch of pale, irritated skin, completely smooth, in shocking contrast to the dark synthetic hairs. "Ouch, you demon!" Viper screamed, his voice faltering and losing Arthur's smooth tone, transforming into a high-pitched screech of pain and rage. The audience let out a collective cry of disgust and confusion, watching the face of their hero literally crumble before the cameras. The imposter, realizing his disguise was hanging by a thread, literally suspended by strips of adhesive, reacted with instinctive and brutal violence. Viper raised his leg, clad in a stiff Italian leather dress shoe, and delivered a powerful kick to Leo's chest. The dull impact of bone against flesh was picked up by the microphones, and the boy was thrown backward, his beard slamming back into the imposter's face like a rubber band. Leo fell to the polished floor, breathless, clutching his ribs, as chaos definitively took hold on stage. Before Leo could catch his breath, the security guard's iron hands lifted him again, this time without any hesitation or care. He was dragged by his feet, his back scraping the floor as he tried in vain to grab onto the cables and carpets, shouting, "Look at his face, it's glue, it's fake!" But his words were drowned out by the loud music of the show's orchestra, which began to play frantically in a desperate attempt by the production to cover the disaster live. They darted through the backstage corridors like a blur, past shocked employees, until they reached the side emergency exit. With a violent shove, the security guards hurled Leo into the rainy New York night. His small body landed painfully in a puddle of icy water and oil in the side alley, the heavy metal door slamming shut behind him with a final, definitive bang, locking him out. Inside the studio, the executive producer, pale and sweating profusely, rushed to the stage where Viper was trying to hide his face with his hand. "My apologies, Mr. Sterling. This is unacceptable. We're firing security immediately," stammered the producer, bowing in profuse apologies, completely blind to the reality of what had just happened, concerned only with not offending the $50 million donor. In the private refuge of the luxurious dressing room, away from the cameras, Viper's good guy mask completely slipped, revealing the psychotic fury beneath. He kicked a velvet chair against the wall, knocking over a vase of orchids, and rushed to the illuminated mirror. His hands trembling with rage, he grabbed the bottle of emergency glue he kept in his inside jacket pocket, pressing his loose beard back against his irritated skin, cursing under his breath as the chemical smell filled the air. His cell phone vibrated on the marble countertop. He grabbed it violently and typed a quick message to the head of his personal security team, a burly man waiting outside. His fingers pounded the screen with lethal force. "The kid knows too much. He saw the glue. Find him outside now and take him out. Make it look like a traffic accident." He looked at his reflection in the mirror, smoothing his now glued-back beard and composing a fake, sinister smile. "Just 10 more minutes," he whispered to himself, adjusting his tie knot. "Sign the paper, take the money, and disappear." He knew the boy was the only loose end in this million-dollar plan, and he was determined to cut it before the program ended. In the freezing rain of the alley, Leo struggled to his feet, feeling a sharp pain in his ribs where he had been kicked. The cold water mingled with the blood from a cut on his lip, but he didn't feel cold. He only felt the throbbing terror of knowing that time was running out. He reached into the wet pocket of his trousers and pulled out the pocket watch that the real Arthur had given him. Under the dim yellow light of a street lamp, the clock seemed to glow with an intensity of its own. The constant ticking was a relentless reminder. The interview continued inside, and with each passing second, the imposter was closer to stealing the fortune and condemning the real Arthur to death. Leo ran his thumb over the inscription engraved on the back of the clock. Truth above all. He knew that no one would believe a street kid's word against a billionaire, unless he had the law on his side. Wiping away tears with his dirty sleeve, Leo clung to his watch as if it were his heart and looked down the street, where the blue neon sign of a police station gleamed a few blocks away. He took a deep breath, ignoring the pain, and started running. The 14th Precinct Police Station was a haven of cold, white fluorescent light, smelling of burnt coffee and bureaucratic despair. Leo burst through the double doors, soaked and breathless, leaving a trail of muddy water on the grimy linoleum as he ran to the high reception desk. The sergeant on duty, a burly man with mustard stains on his blue shirt, barely looked up from his crossword puzzle magazine when the boy began shouting his rambling story about imposters, fake beards, and a kidnapping in Queens. Hey, take it easy, kid," grumbled the policeman, finally looking at Leo with a mixture of boredom and disgust. When Leo mentioned Arthur Sterling and the 50 million, the sergeant let out a hoarse laugh that made his stomach churn. "Sure, son, and I'm the President of the United States," he sneered, gesturing toward the exit with his pen. "We watch TV here. Mr. Sterling is live right now giving money to charity. Stop making up fairy tales to get free food." Leo tried to show the gold watch as proof, but the sergeant frowned, interpreting the gesture as a confession of theft. "Where did you steal this? Get out of here now before I lock you in a juvenile cell for possession of stolen goods," threatened the officer, rising from his chair. With his heart sinking in despair, Leo realized that the law did not protect boys like him. He recoiled, trembling, and ran back into the merciless night. As soon as the police station doors closed behind Leo, a black SUV with tinted windows screeched to a halt, mounting the sidewalk just a few feet from where he stood. The rear window rolled down, and Viper's head of security, a man with a scar on his neck and predatory eyes, pointed at the boy. "There's the rat. Get him," he ordered, and two men jumped out of the moving vehicle, ignoring the traffic and the honking of the yellow taxis. Leo plunged into the rush hour crowd, using his small stature to zigzag between pedestrians in wet overcoats who cursed at the bumps. He jumped the turnstiles of a nearby subway station, sliding down the stair railing as the heavy footsteps of military boots echoed behind him, getting closer and closer. The metallic sound of the approaching train was deafening, mingling with the frantic beating of his own heart. He ran across the crowded platform, knocking over a trash can to create a barrier, and squeezed through the doors of a closing carriage. The thugs banged against the train window, furious, but Leo didn't stand there. He knew they would wait for him at the next station. He needed to be smarter. As the train began to move, he forced open the emergency exit between the carriages and jumped onto the dark tracks on the opposite side, risking his life to get back to the surface before they noticed. Back in the air-conditioned studio sanctuary, Viper's makeup had been touched up, concealing the redness on his chin. but the tension in the air was palpable. Marcus Thorne, the presenter, adjusted his notes, glancing sideways at Mr. Sterling. Something about the guest's aggression during the incident with the boy had triggered a red flag in the experienced journalist's mind. He decided to deviate from the script approved by the PR team. "Arthur," Marcus began, leaning forward with a penetrating gaze. "That boy seemed very troubled. It reminds me of how you always talk about your grandfather, the founder of the empire. He was your moral compass, right?" Marcus paused dramatically, letting the camera focus on the guest's face. "Tell us, what was the phrase he always repeated to you when you went fishing at the family lake? The one that defined your character?" The studio fell into absolute silence. It was a simple question for the real Arthur, a famous anecdote he told at private dinners, but one that had never been published in biographies. Viper blinked, the smile freezing on his lips as his brain fruitlessly scanned the video files he had studied, realizing with horror that that specific detail was not in his preparation dossier. Viper felt a drop of cold sweat trickle down his back, beneath his Egyptian cotton shirt. He cleared his throat, trying to buy time, while his fingers drummed nervously on the arm of the leather armchair. "Ah, my grandfather. Yes," he began, his voice wavering slightly. "He was a man of few words. He always said, 'Catch the big fish.' Yes, always aim for the big fish. That was it." The answer landed in the studio with a dull thud. Marcus raised an eyebrow, clearly confused, and a low murmur of bewilderment ran through the audience. People exchanged glances. The phrase sounded banal, greedy, completely opposite to the image of altruistic philanthropist that Arthur Sterling cultivated. "Catch the big fish?" Marcus repeated, skeptical. "Curious. I thought it was something about honesty." Viper forced a loud, artificial laugh to break the rising tension. "Well, memory fails with age." "Marcus, but what doesn't fail is my willingness to donate that money right now," he declared, abruptly changing the subject and reaching for the tablet on the table, desperate to end the charade before more questions arose. Outside, just a block from the station, Leo spotted the gleaming studio entrance, but the main henchman had anticipated his move and was blocking the sidewalk, grinning with a gleaming switchblade in his hand. Leo didn't stop. He ran straight for the entrance of a luxury hotel on the corner, shouting as if he were about to enter the lobby. The henchman took the bait and rushed to intercept him at the golden revolving door. Leo entered a compartment of the revolving door, and at the exact moment the henchman entered the compartment right behind him, Leo used all his strength to push the door and then locked his foot on the base, stopping the mechanism abruptly. The henchman, with the momentum of the run, violently crashed against the reinforced glass, becoming hermetically sealed between the exit and the entrance, cursing and banging on the glass like a caged animal. "Have fun out there!" Leo shouted, releasing the door and exiting through the other side before the man could recover. With the path finally clear, he sprinted down the wet street toward the station's service entrance, knowing he had only seconds before the digital pen touched the screen and the money, and Arthur's life vanished forever. Ignoring the guarded main doors, Leo ran to the side of the building where he knew the kitchen exhaust vents were located, a path he had learned during days of famine. He climbed over the stacked garbage bins and, his hands bleeding from the effort, ripped the grate off an industrial ventilation duct that spewed hot air. The space was cramped, dark, and smelled of old oil, a metallic labyrinth that echoed his every gasping breath. He dragged himself along on his elbows, the cold metal pressing against his aching ribs, guided only by the vibration of the sound coming from the main studio. Below him, through the gaps in the joints, he saw flashes of light and heard the muffled murmur of the technical crew. Arthur's watch weighed heavily in his pocket, banging against his leg with every movement, reminding him that he carried the only proof of the truth. Finally, he reached a larger ledge, from where he could see the tops of the audience's heads and, beyond, the intense glare of the central stage. He was positioned directly above the glass table where the fate of $50 million was being decided. With trembling fingers, he began to loosen the loose screws of the ledge, preparing for the leap that would define his life. Down below, Viper's patience had run out. "Let's get this over with, Marcus," he said, his tense voice losing its feigned smoothness. "The kids need this money now." The screen behind him pulsed, the transfer progress bar blinking at 99%, awaiting only the final biometric authentication to release the fortune to the Cayman Islands. Marcus, the host, looked uncomfortable, but he had no legal grounds to stop the show. "Very well, Arthur. "Seal the donation," he said, gesturing to the tablet. Viper smiled, a grin of anticipated triumph, and raised his right thumb. The light from the biometric scanner glowed blue, hungry for the fingerprint that would authorize the heist of the century. The silence in the studio was absolute. Every person in the audience craned their neck, mesmerized by the historic moment. Viper's finger descended slowly, millimeters from the glass, as he mentally counted the seconds until his escape. He could already feel the weight of the money, the victory over the system, unaware that the ceiling above him was about to collapse. With a sharp metallic creak that made everyone look up, the ventilation grate gave way. Leo didn't hesitate. He launched himself into the void. It was a blur of movement, dust, and screams. He fell like a human missile, landing with a deafening crash right in the center of the tempered glass table that separated the presenter from the imposter. The table shattered on impact, scattering shards of glass like diamonds across the expensive carpet. The transfer tablet flew off, sliding across the floor before Viper's finger could touch it. The imposter recoiled, falling back into his armchair, while the audience panicked, screaming and rising to their feet. Amidst the wreckage, Leo stood up, coughing through a cloud of dust from the tunnel. He was bruised, dirty, and looked tiny in that grand scene, but his eyes burned with a righteous fury that instantly silenced the room. He was no longer just a street kid. He was the last line of defense for truth. Before the security guards could get back on stage, Leo reached into his pocket and pulled out his gold pocket watch, holding it high so the cameras would focus on it. The gold gleamed brightly under the spotlights, a beacon of legitimacy in the hands of a forgotten child. "He says he's Arthur Sterling," Leo shouted, his hoarse voice reverberating through the sound system, turning to face the audience and then the presenter. "But if he's Arthur, he knows what's written on the back of this watch. His grandfather gave it to him. Ask him. Ask him now." He turned to Viper, who was getting up, pale as a ghost. "What does it say here, you liar?" Leo challenged, shoving the watch toward the imposter's face but keeping the inscription hidden. "Tell them Grandpa Sterling's line." The challenge hung in the air, simple and irrefutable. Viper opened his mouth, but no sound came out. His eyes darted from side to side, searching for a way out, searching for his henchmen, searching for anything but that damned watch. Sweat dripped freely down his forehead now, melting his makeup and causing the fake beard to peel off at the edges again. His silence was a glaring confession. Marcus Thorne, realizing the terrible truth before his eyes, stepped forward. With deadly seriousness, he took the watch from Leo's trembling hand. The presenter glanced at Viper, then slowly turned the watch over to read the back. He brought the microphone to his lips, his eyes fixed on the imposter with icy contempt. "The truth above all else. Grandpa Sterling," Marcus read aloud, clearly. He looked up at Viper. "You didn't know that. You're not Arthur Sterling." The sentence landed like a death sentence. The mask had definitively fallen, not just the physical one, but the moral one, exposing the monster to millions of live viewers. Panic gripped Viper like an electric shock. Realizing the game was over, he violently shoved the presenter and tried to jump off the stage, running towards the emergency exit. But in his blind haste, the tip of his Italian shoe snagged on one of the exposed camera cables on the floor. He fell face first onto the carpet, a humiliating thud that echoed through the studio. And with the impact, his already loose fake beard completely detached, sliding across the floor like a dead, hairy animal, leaving his naked and pathetic face exposed to the world. "Stop! New York police! Hands where I can see them!" shouted an authoritative voice from the wings. Half a dozen uniformed police officers, discreetly summoned by the producer minutes earlier, stormed the stage with guns drawn. Viper tried to get up, but was immediately immobilized, his face pressed against the cold floor as the steel handcuffs clicked onto his wrists, closing with the coldness of inevitable justice. Leo watched everything from atop the broken table, his breath still ragged, while the audience cheered frantically, not for the show, but for the reality of prison. The imposter was dragged out under a hail of boos and flashes, shouting empty threats that no one else heard. The charade had crumbled, and in the center of the wreckage, a small boy stood, victorious against a criminal giant. The broadcast of the Prophet View was abruptly cut off for a breaking news bulletin. The screen filled with the red banner of breaking news, showing shaky aerial images of a helicopter flying over the Queens Industrial District. The swirling sirens of SWAT vehicles illuminated the rainy night outside the abandoned warehouse Leo had described, transforming the desolate location into a frantic crime scene. "We have confirmation now," announced the news anchor, her voice deep and professional. Thanks to the ignored tip-off from the young hero in the studio, the tactical unit stormed the location moments ago. The camera cut to street level, showing paramedics emerging from the darkened building pushing a stretcher. On it was the real Arthur Sterling, dehydrated and with marks on his wrists, but alive and weakly waving at the cameras. The billionaire was found tied up and gagged exactly as the boy described. The reporter continued. Police confirmed that the gang planned to execute him as soon as the transfer was completed. The testimony of a street child, whom many considered insane, ended up saving one of New York's most valuable lives. 3 days later, the scene shifted from the chaos of the studio to the serene elegance of the steps of Sterling Mansion. A crowd of reporters jostled behind the velvet ropes, but a respectful silence fell when the double oak doors opened. Arthur, with one arm in a sling and some bandages on his face, walked to the podium. But he wasn't alone. Beside him, holding his healthy hand, was Leo. The boy was unrecognizable. The dirt and torn clothes had vanished, replaced by a tailored navy blue suit that matched Arthur's. His hair was cut and combed, and his clean, nourished face revealed the childlike beauty that poverty had hidden for so long. He looked at the cameras no longer with fear, but with a proud shyness, squeezing Arthur's hand as if it were his anchor in the world. "Ladies and gentlemen," Arthur began, his voice choked with genuine emotion, a stark contrast to the imposter's performance. "Many of you witnessed the worst of humanity that night, the greed, the lies, but you also saw the best." He looked down at Leo and smiled with a paternal tenderness that sent the cameras firing in a flurry of flashes. "You saw courage where no one expected to find it. The $50 million that were almost stolen will no longer go to the original foundation," Arthur declared, adopting a firm tone. "I have decided to create the Leo Initiative. Every penny will be used to build high-quality shelters for street children. No talent will be wasted, no voice will be ignored because of dirty clothes ever again." There were murmurs of approval and restrained applause, but Arthur raised his hand, gesturing for silence for the most important part. He lowered himself to Leo's eye level, ignoring the microphones for a second. "But the greatest gift isn't money," he said, turning to the press. "I lost my family a long time ago, and Leo never had one, until today." "The papers were signed this morning," Arthur announced, his voice faltering with restrained tears. "I want to introduce you not to the heroic street kid, but to my son, Leonardo Sterling, the sole heir to my fortune and, more importantly, to my heart." Leo hugged Arthur's waist tightly, burying his face in his father's jacket, while the reporters, hardened by their profession, discreetly wiped their eyes. Night had fallen gently over Sterling Mansion. On the second floor, in a room larger than the entire alley where he lived, Leo lay on a soft bed with Egyptian cotton sheets. The room was warmed by a crackling fireplace, and the walls were decorated with bookshelves and toys he had never dreamed of owning. The silence of the house was not frightening, but protective, a fortress against the cold world outside. Leo turned to the mahogany bedside table. There, under the golden light of the lamp, lay the antique pocket watch. He picked it up, feeling the familiar metal, and opened the lid one last time. Truth above all. He closed the watch with a soft click and placed it back beside a framed photograph taken that day. Him and Arthur, laughing together. He turned off the light, pulled the duvet up to his chin, and looked out the window. The rain pattered against the glass, the same rain that used to freeze him, but now it was just a distant lullaby. For the first time in his life, Leo closed his eyes without fear of not waking up, letting out a deep, happy sigh. He was home. Leo and Arthur's extraordinary journey leaves us with a profound and timeless lesson about the dangerous illusion of appearances in our superficial modern world. We hastily judge a book by its worn cover, despising those who wear rags while blindly idolizing those who hide behind designer labels and titles, without realizing the fatal error. In that studio, hundreds of influential people were deceived by a cheap performance, and it took the bravery of a boy considered trash by society to clear everyone's minds and restore true justice. The irony of fate shows us that the most expensive security and the most advanced systems failed to protect the billionaire. But a simple sandwich shared in an alley saved his life. The unwavering loyalty that Leo demonstrated was not bought with the promise of inheritance or great rewards, but was built on genuine moments of humanity and mutual respect. This proves to us that the most valuable investments we can make are not in the stock market, but in the lives of the people who cross our path. regardless of their social status. Today, Leo sleeps soundly, not only because he inherited a mansion, but because he had the courage to shout the truth when the whole world demanded his silence and submission. True wealth wasn't transferred on that digital tablet on stage, but in the sacred moment when a father found a son and a boy found a home.